Good morning, OBBC. Have you ever had a time in your life when all you could think about was resting? One of my favorite things to do is hiking or backpacking, and I remember days, long days, where you're hiking all day with a big heavy backpack on, and all I could think about was when we finally got to our campsite or where we were going, and I could take the backpack off and just sit down, and it felt like once I sat down I would never get up again because you're so tired. I'm sure that many of us have felt that way at one point or another, probably pretty often in our lives, where all we could think about was rest. You know what? Sometimes it's not even physical exhaustion. It's a long day, we're stressed out, we feel overwhelmed or worn down with the pressures of life, and all we want is a little bit of rest. You know what? There's a lot of things in life that people turn to find rest or to find escape from the problems of life. But really, there's only one thing that can provide true rest in our lives. This morning, I want to take a look at Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2. And if we look quickly just at verse 1, it tells us the answer to where we can find true rest. It says that those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This gives us the answer to the question, where do we find true rest? Here, David tells us from his own experience, no doubt, that if we place our trust in God, He promises to give us the rest that we so desperately need. It describes God as our shelter or our shadow, which is a picture of not only His divine protection over us, but also His comfort, that He's there in the midst of our struggles and our problems. You know, just a few days ago, we were out milling some wood, and it was a really hot day, like many days are here. But the sun was beating down, it was almost unbearable, and there was really no shelter around the place that we were milling this wood. And there was the stump of the tree that we were milling, and it's a pretty big tree, so it had a pretty big shadow, especially in the morning. But as the day went on, that shadow got smaller and smaller, and it was funny to see as the day went on, whenever we would have a break, that everyone would be huddled in, squeezing into this ever shrinking shadow to find relief from this sun that was just beating down. And it reminded me of this passage when David says that God will be our shadow, that we'll find rest in this shadow. You know what? A lot of times life is like a scorching sun, isn't it? We feel like it just is beating down and won't let up. But even in those moments, here's where we see this promise that God will be our refuge. He will be a shadow over us to provide rest and protection during these times. So how do we live in that shelter? The first verse says that if we live in the shelter of the Most High, how do we live in that shelter? Let's look at verse 2 for the answer. Verse 2 says, "This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust Him." Here David expresses his faith and trust in God and his commitment to Him. He knows that he can trust God to provide a refuge for him. You know, so often we get that feeling like God isn't close to us, and it's in those moments that we have to ask ourselves, what are we trusting in? What are we looking to provide that rest from the trials and struggles and scorching sun of this life? What are we turning to in those times of trouble? Is it God? Or is it other things that we're trusting in? Do we really believe that God can meet our needs? That God can provide all that we need for rest and protection in this world? It says that David declares these things. He shouts them out. He speaks them out loud. And I can't help but think how important that is for us to remind ourselves of these truths that God has given to us, that we know in our head but so often forget in the way that we live. I don't know what you're dealing with this morning, but I do know that we all have things in our lives where we need rest. And God is the only one that can provide that for us. Don't waste your time trying to find rest and comfort in other things when we know that God can provide that for us. Turn to Him, call out to Him, ask Him to help you. Trust in Him that He will do what He says He'll do. I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday. Thank you for watching.